Started. So hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining as I'm going through this attendees list. It's so great to see everyone trickling in. Thank you for being here. My name is Analicia Mejia Mesinas. I'm a board member of Journey House. I actually joined the board just at the beginning of this last year. And so it's really been a privilege to join with the work of Journey House and really get to learn and grow with the organization. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Criminal Justice at Azusa Pacific University. I know we have some Azusa students with us today, so shout out to you. Thank you for joining. So I want to start, I'll be moderating the event for tonight, and we have two major goals. So the first is to really begin a conversation to shed some of the light, shed some light on the wonderful work that Journey House has been committed to for the last 35 years. I think that Journey House has been doing such amazing work, both providing services and advocacy work. And we want to take this opportunity to learn from Journey House staff and former Journey House youth, or former foster youth, or really Journey House youth that have been kind of along the ride with us. And so we're excited to be a part of this conversation. Secondly, I really want to kind of shed some light and take some time to discuss the ways in which COVID has especially impacted former foster youth in this current moment. Our numbers are growing every day, and it's really kind of it's a scary time, unprecedented times. And while COVID is affecting all of us in kind of different ways, a group that often goes unrecognized is the former foster youth population. So we think that it's important in this moment to highlight some of those journeys and speak to and add to the conversation of the current climate. With us today, we have 5 wonderful panelists, and I will introduce each of you. So first we have George Camarena, who is the program director of Journey House. He's been with Journey House since 2004, and he is dedicated to providing direct service to Journey House youth. And he's also worked to decrease barriers that foster youth experience and former foster youth as they transition into adulthood. The rest of our panelists, I'm really excited to say, are all Journey House youth. And Jesse, specifically Jesse Aguiar, actually is the director of our Beyond Foster Care program. So Beyond Foster Care is an advocacy campaign program that Jesse had a direct hand in developing and implementing. And its goal is to raise awareness on the impacts of aging out policies that impact foster youth. Thank you, Jesse, for being with us tonight. We also have Lucero Noyola. Lucero holds a master's in social work from USC, the University of Southern California. And she is currently a fellow for the Youth Transitions Funders Group. In her role as a fellow, she consults on a range of issues affecting vulnerable young people and philanthropy's role in supporting better outcomes. Damian Pichenrungsky, or D, who is also a Journey House youth, is a screenwriter, a rapper, a teacher, and a foster youth advocate. D was actually one of the first former foster youth who was employed by Journey House and is currently a special ed assistant at LAUSD. Miani Giron is a former foster youth and an MD candidate at UCLA School of Medicine. Miani is aspiring to become a psychiatrist and is expected to begin training in the fall of 2021. I can't stress enough how amazing of a group of people we have with us tonight. Thank you all for being here and really giving me the privilege to moderate this discussion with all of you. I want to begin with a brief background of Journey House. So I know that a lot of you who are with us range in your familiarity with Journey House. So I want to just kind of shed some light on the background as I know it. And then with that, we'll lead with some questions to our panelists. So I personally was connected to the work of Journey House a couple years ago through Jesse. With Jesse's work with the Beyond Foster Care campaign, he actually presented to my students at Azusa Pacific University a number of times. And he's also really worked with a number of universities across the state of California to develop a narrative on the experiences of both current and former foster youth. Through Jesse, I was also introduced to the director and founder of Journey House, Tim Mayworm. Special shout out to Tim who is with us tonight in attendance, or as Dee likes to call him, Pops. In 1983, Tim opened the doors of Journey House in Pasadena, California, to serve the needs of youth who were on probation and in foster care. However, as Tim and Journey House staff worked really closely with the youth, at the time it was a residential program, they also began to identify some challenges that youth were facing when they hit that 18th birthday, right? As we know it here, the aging out system. And at that time, our laws were different in California. So 18 was that mark. And they noticed that on the 18th birthday, many youth aged out of the system and often kind of experienced a lot of loss and disconnection. So since then, Journey House has expanded into both a service and advocacy organization. It is now one of the very few organizations that continues to serve former foster youth at all stages of adulthood. And I think that's something we really want to highlight today, right? This notion of serving former foster youth at all stages of adulthood, because that journey can be rough in transitions, but very, very meaningful. And as our panelists here can show us, right, also such amazing work and accomplishments. So with that, I'm going to start with George, and I'm going to ask each of you a couple of questions. For those of you in attendance, we'll do some questions from our panelists for about less than an hour or so. And then with that, we'll go into our Q&A. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the chat, or you can wait till the end. Either way works, but we won't get into the Q&A until the end of our program. So we'll make sure to allow at least 20 minutes for that session. So with that, George, and I really want to ask all of you this question, this idea of, how do you see the work of Journey House? How has Journey House impacted you? And George, maybe you can talk a little bit about that history that I mentioned and that transition into the work that you do now.
Sure. Well, thank you, Annalicia, for moderating this, and everybody in attendance. Thank you so much for joining us on a beautiful evening. So yeah, Journey House dates back to 1983, like you mentioned, and it was initially a group home for 6 boys on probation in foster care. And really what Tim designed the program to be is an opportunity for those youth to go on to preparatory, college prep, high schools, so that they could then transition into a university education. Well, what he realized is that not too many schools, especially in the public school system, were really giving the opportunity to many of these youth. At the time, he started noticing that trend that you mentioned, that at 18 years old, they were cut off from all services and actually asked to leave the foster care system, not necessarily graduating into anything else. So he started shifting the services. So going forward 25 years after being a residential group home, we shifted into what it is today, which is really providing the opportunity for thorough education for former foster youth as they transition out of foster care. The laws have changed, so there have been a lot of new programs that do benefit those youth who are leaving the foster care system, from housing, education opportunities, and scholarships. But still, we see that there's still a high need that is not being met. So we have shifted our programs to be able to support those youth in 4 basic components: housing, education, employment, and independent living counseling. And independent living counseling to us is everything else that they might have a question about. So with that said, is what we do today is we get to work with so many great, wonderful, and talented young people leaving the foster care system that are motivated and that are extremely talented and continue on to their education. And we just get to support their goals.
I'll have to remember to unmute myself. Thank you for sharing that. With that, I guess we'll transition over to Jesse. So, George really talked about this history and this, the servicing program side, right? The servicing the needs of former foster youth at all stages. And so I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit on the beyond foster care and that advocacy component, And really, I think one of the things that are unique, as I was introducing all of you, is the idea that that Journey House really invests in its youth, right? You know, you as someone who was a former foster youth and now a director of this Beyond Foster Care campaign. So tell me a little bit about that campaign and the work that Journey House is doing.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really fortunate. I think that my story with Journey House really comes full circle. Um, One of my biggest prides, anytime that I talk about Journey House, is to share that I was a part. I was one of the residents of the group home, the last cohort of boys that lived in the group home in 2007. And so I've really gotten to see the transition that the organization has made in a very intimate and a very unique way, because it was at that same time when Journey House was now transitioning to provide supported services to former foster youth. And in 2014, we got a very generous grant, a private family foundation, to expand services at Journey House, the direct services that we were providing, but also um, um, one of the agreements on the grants was also that Journey House would hire two former foster youth. That's how the opportunity for me to join on as staff sort of came, and we started in the summer 2015, um, really with the purpose of trying to figure out, one, how we were going to be telling the stories of foster youth, because we knew that that was the core mission of what we were going to create. That at the time we didn't know yet that it was going to be beyond foster care and what it's become today.
Mm.
But we did know that at the center of it, we were going to be working with a Journey House youth to create a program that was for us and by us. And so we had a launch event in the summer of 2015 where over 50 former foster youth got together. And that's actually where I met Lucero Noyola, who I immediately knew was going to be a major player in developing the campaign, because of her ability to be able to identify issues and really kind of see the big picture in terms of the needs of the people that we're going to be talking about. And um, as we began to do our analysis and our field analysis about the needs and where we could best fit in, um, we knew that um, the unique pillar of Journey House, um, of providing services without an age limit,
Mm.
was going to be the North Star of the Beyond Foster Care campaign. And specifically, what that means is that we were going to be out there talking about the need to support the foster youth without age limits, and specifically providing needs based services. And you know, we were really fortunate that George and Tim and our board were really supportive of this vision that we were sort of crafting up, and put the time and the energy and the resources behind making sure that the vision that we were crafting up could become the reality that we now have with the campaign, and a lot of the success that we're having with the campaign. But um, we identified that for us, it was beyond the direct immediate support, was putting advocating for policies that put in place long-term structural changes that will benefit the members of Journey House, but also foster youth around the state, because we knew that the institutions that make the rules, that govern funding, that govern programming and services, are all rules that are being made in Sacramento. And so we're very adamant from the very beginning that those were going to be where our allies were going to be, and where we were going to be spending a lot of time working to try to change some of those laws that were putting those age limits on programs and services. And so that's then what has created everything that we have now.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have this, the direct service and our advocacy work. Miani, I was hoping that maybe you can add a little to this in talking about the work of Journey House, but maybe shedding a light of what the work of Journey House means to you.
Sure. First of all, thank everyone for coming. I know even from home, it's really hard to get on another Zoom meeting. So thank you for being here. And in brief, to me, Journey House is a bridge and a consistent form of support. I met Journey House, specifically George, during I was going into my last year at Syracuse University. And just to give you a little bit of context, I was one of the first foster youth to participate in extended foster care, which was it started in 2012, and that was the year I turned 2018. And the year I turned 21, I still had one more year to complete of college. And that was a really important year for me because I was applying for medical school. So not only did I have the normal expenses that I had for college, but I had this tremendous expense of flying and applications and hotels and all these other things. So I was just so lucky to meet George and kind of be put in contact with Journey House as a organization because literally I could not have made it through my year without any type of support, without that help. So for me, I just wanted to highlight that gap was like everything I needed, because I would not be here today talking about graduation in a couple months had it not been for that gap in what's the word support that was filled by Journey House. And more than that, even when I don't need anything, they're there. Like they call and they email just to get check-ins, and they're really just hosting Christmas events and just spa days and things that really build community, which I think is vital, because I've been a part of many scholarship programs, and unfortunately sometimes they just end and like they go away and you're like, who are these people, where are they? Like all the people that I met throughout the year, they just kind of fizzle away. So that is one thing that absolutely stands out about Journey House to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lucero, I guess I'll go to you. Can you speak a little bit about your own experience with Journey House and what the work of Journey House means to you?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of Miani, thanks everyone for being here. And yeah, I think Journey House has really been that one consistent place that I felt like at home and that there was community there. I know Journey House because they they supported me while I was a student at USC during my undergrad and graduate years. And then I also started working with Journey House during my MSW. I was really struggling, trying to figure out like what I was doing with my graduate program, and Journey House offered me a position because I took a leave. And for me, I think that's one of the strongest, one of the most important things is that with an organization is that I can come to Journey House during my good times and my bad times. And I'm comfortable feeling vulnerable with Journey House and letting them know what's really going on with me, and that I'm struggling, and I'm I thought this is what I wanted to do, and now that I'm in it, maybe it's not so much what I wanted to do, and like I'm learning things that I like, things that I don't like, and they're there to support me through that. And they offered me a job, and that's when I helped Jesse build the Beyond Foster Care campaign. So I also know Journey House through my role in helping build the campaign. And so for me, Journey House has always been a place where I feel comfortable, where I have community that I can go to during the good and the bad. And I think it's also a kick-ass little org that has really that is really strong, even though we're small in numbers, in terms of the advocacy and those successes that Jesse can share about later. We've had some really great ones, and we were a tiny team, and we've done some really big things, not just for the young people that go through Journey House's doors, but for people of our background, former foster youth, current foster youth, like across the whole state.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think like it speaks volumes, the fact that both you and Jesse are here to provide testimony to that. And all of you, I mean, I think this notion and this idea that I really learned from Journey House, or I've seen in Journey House of, once we're here, we've got your back. And to see all of you come back and be willing to participate in this, I think is great. Which I think leads me to Dee, right? And your own experience with Journey House and coming back to share your own story. Can you talk to me about, the work of Journey House and what Journey House means to you?
Yeah, definitely. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. Happy holidays to you all. Um, I think my time and my relationship with Journey House outdates almost everybody on this panel. Um, 1992, I was on the streets and I had a conversation with an old foster brother I had, Chris Coleman. Never forget this guy, and you'll understand why. And he just told me, look, what's going on? Told him my situation. He said, Tim just kicked out somebody. We got a we got an open bed up here. You might want to talk to him. And I remember Pops got on the phone. He asked me one question: what do you want to do with your life?
Mhm.
And at that moment in time, all I wanted to do was go to school like a normal person, have a home, wake up, get breakfast, go to school, come back home, got support, all that good family stuff. And I meant it. I really, truly wanted to go to school. And the next thing I know, I was moving in the Journey House the next day. And so literally, Pops took me from the streets. And, anybody who's known me and knows the film that I wrote and knows my story, you can guess what I was doing on the streets as I was talking to Pops about moving in the Journey House. And nothing to be proud of, but it's all survival. And that's the thing that Journey House instilled in me, was that I didn't have to survive anymore. I could live, and gave me the opportunity to go to school, took me seriously. I remember I was heavily in the architecture and drafting. Tim Pops was like, are you serious?" He took me down to the store, got me all these, Valium and different pencils and stuff. The high school that eventually took me in didn't even have drafting, so it was all for naught, right? But he still gave me that opportunity, like, whatever you need, kid. And I finally had more than two pairs of pants. I finally had more than two shirts. Didn't have holy sneakers no more, and could finally feel like a normal human being, and that was valued. And I'll never forget that, ever, because it is everything of who I am today. A survivalist, and no matter what challenges come, that's what Journey House has taught me, is like, you will get through this. We got your back. Now, 20 some odd years later, almost 30 years, they're still supporting me. George and Pops, helping me with school stuff, setting up school stuff, and, supporting everything that I'm doing in school, and, allowing me to use Journey House for projects. So 30 years later, I'm the testament. It's still going on. The opportunities, the support, the love, that never goes away. And I can't tell you another foster parent or group home that I
Mm.
was at before Journey House. So Journey House is my home. When I get on that 110 freeway heading into Pasadena, I know I'm finally going home. So that's what Journey House represents to me. Now, obviously, I come from a more emotional standpoint of it. So I'm glad that people like Jesse and Lucero set up that vision to create opportunities for former foster youth after they age out. When I was going through Journey House, we didn't have that.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Luckily, Pops got me into school, which I messed up, but he still gave me that opportunity. Like, here you go. You want to go to school? I'm going to set you up after all you did. And I still messed it up. And he still took me back time and time and time again. Matter of fact, I could tell you right now, former board members used to ask him, why do you keep helping this kid? Because for foster youth, it never ends. We don't know when that trauma is going to hit. We don't know when those nightmares are going to strike, or when you're going to be told by Hollywood, when you write a film about foster care, who wants to see this? We dealing with the recession. You talking about foster youth. I'm like, so my life didn't matter to you at all? You gave me the opportunity to listen to my story, but now you're telling me that the movie about foster care doesn't matter? And that was 2003. And I can pinpoint every time a movie was using foster care for some kind of character arc. You know what I mean? But in 2003, oh, we're not talking 2008, we're not talking about foster care. You know what I mean? But we all matter at all times and it never stops. You know, so to have somebody like Journey House, a place like Journey House, George and Pops and Jesse, you know, this is home, this is family. This is what I was telling you. I don't feel nervous. This is my family right here. So I'm home. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm glad that you can be home. I think that's
Ah,
beautiful. With that, I mean, I think, as you said, right, talking about the needs of former foster youth, I really want to transition into that. You know, what are the needs? And more importantly, right, why are supporting the needs so important? And I'll start this with you, Lucero, as one of, you know, as another former Journey House staff member who played a role in also, you know, creating a vision, developing the Beyond Foster Care and implementing it. You know, when you were in that moment, or even as you see it today, why do you think supporting the needs of older foster youth, or just supporting, you know, former foster youth in general, is so important, especially in this time?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Damien. I love listening to you speak because it really does melt the nerves away.
ah,
Yeah, for me, a lot of my work has been, centered around like how can we support disconnected youth? Because I've always felt really privileged that, I got the support that I needed, and that I've had organizations like Journey House, who I can really feel comfortable and at home with. And I've seen, a lot of my friends and, people who I've met that are of similar background, and, they don't have that. And so I'm usually, I'm very kind of adamant about like how can we better support disconnected youth. And I feel for me that disconnected youth are the former foster youth. They are the older foster youth because they don't have access to services anymore. And like that's how they have become disconnected. I think um, with uh, SILP, I think it is. I mean, it wasn't in part of my generation, but once that extension happened, I think you can opt into that, but some folks decide not to. But that support, is there, and you can opt in. Um, by a certain age. After that, like what happens to those young people who really need that support? And I feel like, you know, it's not enough for, I feel like it's never really been enough for people to share their experiences and for it to be validated just with that alone. Like research also has validated the experiences of former foster youth, even with the latest Cal Youth study, which is like a study of a bunch of former foster youth in California, um, that like even at the age of 23, they're still experiencing really poor outcomes in terms of like education attainment, housing, mental health, and employment. So for me, I think that, the research shows it that we have really non-traditional pathways to reaching self-sufficiency. And so I think when we have a framework like the TAFE framework, that you need to have it all together between 21 and 24, it's not realistic. And I think it leaves a lot of people out who, at some point in their lives decide that they do want to go back to school, or that, they want to, get housing. Um, so I feel like it's just not realistic, and that I think the current framework really kind of leaves people out in the cold, if we don't kind of subscribe to this framework, and like it's too bad for us. So I think that's why it's really important to discuss, the issues of like, what is out there for former foster youth. Um, and I think it's something that I always advocate for, and it's what really, brings what why I really align with Journey House and their work, and why, when we built Beyond Foster Care, that was really what we were pushing for. Like Jesse said earlier, was needs based services, and these age criterias aren't really helping anybody.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Awesome. No, thank you. I mean, I think you raise a good point in the ways in which we need to shift that conversation for discussing the needs of former foster youth. I think that we think about, even as we've extended this age, right? You said transition age youth, right? 21 to 24, but that makes a lot of assumptions about where people are or are supposed to be at those ages, and also misses all of the other things that people go through at those stages, and just to assume that at 24 even you have it all together. I think that's a big assumption. Jesse, do you want to speak a little bit more about kind of how you see this, and why, to add on to how Lucetta was explaining it, why supporting older youth is so important?
Yeah. I think it's important to recognize, George touched on it a little bit, that the state of foster care in California today is very different than it was, just 2010, right? In 2010, part of the old school train. Anybody who emancipated out of foster care, 2011, 2010, or before that, you're putting all your belongings in a trash bag and you were going to court, and they would, congratulate you on your 18th birthday and say, now you're on your own. And we've come a long way since those days. We have, the extended foster care, which Lucetta was talking about, supervised independent living program that allows young people to be able to maintain, their foster care status up until 21. And we have independent living programs, there are transitional housing programs, that provide support for foster youth as they are transitioning into adulthood. But one of the trends that we began to see, and the patterns that we were noticing, is that a lot of young people are coming to Journey House at 21, 24, and they're saying, you know what, I'm ready to get on my own 2 feet. I'm ready to, take life seriously. I'm ready to go back to school. I'm ready to get sober, etc. And they're coming to Journey House a lot of the times because Journey House is the only place that is willing to have a conversation with an older foster youth. So it's kind of like the last stop. Um, at the same time, as we're having a conversation with them, we're saying, well, did you access this support? Did you access that support? Many of the students and many of the people that come in never heard of the Chafee grant, never heard of extended foster care, never heard of the transitional housing programs. And by the time that they did, it was too late. And this was the reality that we were really kind of grappling with in 2018, when we sponsored the legislation to expand California's Chafee grant. Prior to 2018, the Chafee grant was allocated to foster youth between the ages of 18 to 21, and we were making the case and arguing that um, a lot of people are not accessing the grant because they don't know about it, right? And the reality being that people who have been in foster care all of their lives, when they turn 18, they want to get as far away as possible from anything that is programming, anything that sounds like foster care, anything that smells like foster care, because this institution that was governing their lives, governing when they ate, when they showered, what clothes they wore, right? And so even if it meant forfeiting all these resources, that was a better option than to continuing to prolong life inside this institution. And so experimenting with adulthood, couch surfing, or whatever the situation may be, was the better option than to continue this. And we're seeing that the older that they get, the more that they realize, you know what, I need some help. I need some support. Um, it's really there. How do you strap up the boots to get to work if you don't even have any boots to strap up in the first place? And so we were arguing this case saying, you know what, young people just need a little bit more time. And so we were able to advocate for the expansion of the Chafee grant to go from 21 to 26, which was a major win in the state of California for foster youth, um, because the Chafee grant, it is a $5,000 scholarship that goes directly to foster youth who are in school, and the funding. Foster youth can use it's flexible. They can use it for their housing, they can use it for their meals, they can use it for clothing, they can use it for their rent, childcare. I mean, it is really. We were excited about this because the Chafee Grant is one of those Gold Star programs that we see really aligns with Journey House's approach to supporting foster youth, on and their individual needs. Um, and with this expansion of the age limit, we were also able to secure a $4 million allocation into the program, in revenue, in state funds, each year. So what that was is now every year, there will be about 800 new scholarships of up to $5,000 that now, people can access between 18 to 26.
Mm.
And so for us, and myself, personally, um, I have a lot of my background is in criminal justice advocacy. And one of the things that we were seeing, that became a big trend in the criminal justice space was really the way that the criminal justice space was adopting brain science research and really understanding that young people are still developing, they're still growing, they're still maturing into their mid 20s. And this body of knowledge has really, be, sprung up national movements and wide sweeping reforms that has shifted the way that the criminal justice system understands young people from the ages of 25 and under. Even our newly elected LA County District Attorney, George Kaskin, recently released a statement, and I'll read his quote. He says, "I have just informed the California Supreme Court of my intent to withdraw a brief filed by LADA office supporting the transfer of young teens to adult court. Brain development continues into our mid 20s. For too long, our criminal justice system has failed to treat kids like kids." So we're seeing the way that this understanding is at the forefront of this field. And we've been trying to bring this information into the foster care world and say, yes, we've made major improvements, but the transition age youth framework that Lucero was talking about, um, while we recognize and we appreciate all of the momentum that has led to this moment that we're at today, where we can even talk about the idea of supporting 24 and older foster youth. Um, the truth is that to say that by 24 as a foster youth, you have to be self-sufficient, you have to be able to afford your own rent, afford your own medical benefits, afford that is an unrealistic expectation to place on any young person, even those who have an ideal family background and situation at home, let alone for somebody that has been raised by the foster care institution. And so, what we've been really kind of trying to advocate around is really to raise this reality and get people to understand this, um, that trauma and healing from trauma is very personal and very individual. And putting age limits on funding, putting age limits on programs really puts a time limit on when that healing journey needs to happen, which is it's for none of us to tell. That those journeys are individual, and the support should be there to support people when they're ready to receive that support. And so that is really like at the core philosophy, not just of the advocacy that we've been doing, but the decades work that Journey House has been doing for the last 35 plus years.
Absolutely. And I wanted to see, Damien, if you could speak a little bit to that. I know you've talked about your own journey and how you see, right, the needs of older youth as they go through different life stages when, it seems as if, we expect, all these things by 26 even. And as Jesse's saying, the research shows that, well, that's just when the brain's fully developed. So it's almost like we're just getting started there.
Right. Right. I mean, the notion that you need to be self-sufficient at 26 is ridiculous. I'm 19 years past that, so at 45, I could tell you right now, I'm just now gaining the emotional intelligence to deal with the challenges that come up every day. Not just, oh, you got to do this, you got to conform, but having the emotional intelligence to think beyond, oh, this is the trauma or this is because of this, and understanding that life, my life can't be on somebody else's timetable. You know, I grew up in the streets and in foster care my whole life. Up until that year and a half at I was at Journey House, and afterwards, it's all anybody was doing was taking advantage. The only time that it wasn't being taken advantage was at Journey House. I was just too stubborn and didn't have the know-how or the intelligence and the maturity to understand, like, yo, man, these people are really trying to help you. You treating them like everybody else who's dogged you, but that mentality stays with you. I mean, to this day, I have paranoia like, oh, are you trying to play me? Or are we, is this real support? Is this real love? Is this whatever the case may be? So the trauma that Jesse speaks to, I'm still living through at 45, and the only blessing that I could speak to is that I get to wake up every morning and look at my kids and know that they ain't never got to go through that, you know? So I did something right. I made sure that my seeds will never, ever have to endure this kind of pain, this kind of trauma. This ain't a D therapy session, so I'm not going to get into all of that stuff. But it's still prevalent at 45. I just want to make that clear, And so when you talk about a Chafee grant up to 26, I'm like, damn, I could have used that $5,000 for school, And even now, I'm going to school full time in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of teaching from home, in the midst of, teaching my kids at home. And so I can't get no scholarships. There's no scholarships for 45-year-olds. I'm supposed to have it made already. I'm supposed to be whatever it is that their connotation of me is supposed to be. But hello, you didn't walk in my footsteps all 45 years. You can't tell me when I'm supposed to be ready. I don't care what laws you come up with or whatever have you. I leave that to Jesse. He can go fight for that. But emotionally and maturity wise, man, you can't put a timetable on that. That's not
Absolutely.
fair to any human being.
Mm, yeah. Miani, I was hoping you could share a little bit about your own experience as someone, like you said, joining Journey House in your senior year and going on to medical school, which is a great feat. In what ways, have you seen as in your journey, has Journey House been there to support your work as well?
So I'll start with how Journey House has been there for me. So to begin with, applications when I was still in New York, that was just like a huge part and like one of the most important parts. And it wasn't a cheap part of it either, unfortunately. I realized, how they have that phrase, like it takes money to make money. So true, even when it comes to education. So I can not imagine what life would have been like before support. I felt like 21 was young for like a cutoff, like how, like I can't. So at 18, I've just been like, probably wouldn't even aspire to do what it is I'm doing because that would have been just too big of a hassle or like a fear to overcome. Like, how am I going to do this instead of focusing on doing it? So that's just one thing. Second was flying back and forth. My goal was to come back to California because I went to New York not really knowing what New York was as far as climate wise, and I realized how blessed I was to like be born and raised in Los Angeles. Like, I gotta get back, and they helped me get back. So I'm very thankful for that. The other thing is I wanted to go to UCLA. So UCLA is a prestigious school, and sometimes you have to do like things that are above and beyond because just kind of being you isn't enough. And so for me, that meant doing a summer long program at the medical school, specifically for people who are underrepresented in medicine. So it basically ends up being a lot of Black and Brown people in the program. And so that required me to be on the campus. And if anybody knows where Westwood is, that is not a cheap neighborhood. It's actually a very expensive neighborhood. But regardless of that, they Journey House didn't care about the cost of where I was living because they knew that this was a fundamental part of the steps and where I was trying to go. It wasn't like I was just calling up like, oh, I want to live like in a fancy bougie neighborhood. It was like, no, I want to go to school and this is what it takes to get into this particular school. So they were there for that. So those are just a few examples. And earlier you asked some of the other youth here basically why it's important to continue support for people who are like former foster youth who are not within those age restrictions. And all I can say really is I'm an example of what happens when you support youth like all the way until they get to their destination. And like I'm almost there. I cannot wait.
You got to claim it. You got to claim it. Yes.
You know, actually, that's a technique that, you know, they use in the mental health field is envisioning where you want to be, because if you like live it and assume it, then that's how you become it. But I'm going to take Dee's terminology and say this is not Miani's therapy room, but just a fun fact. So yeah, that's really all I can say is that support and community mean everything. Just having someone consistently in your corner telling you like you can do it and you can keep going and we're going to help you is just invaluable.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. I want to switch gears slightly because I think we've talked about, you know, the trauma and the challenges, but we've also talked about, right, the beautiful journeys and the support and the ways in which Journey House has really, really focused on this mission of former foster youth and those who have aged out. And I think, Miani, you said it best, right? That community of care and being there so that all of our youth can really succeed and do good things. Unfortunately, however, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and that has changed life for a lot of us. And so I wanted to start with George, given the kind of direct services that you've been providing. In what ways have you seen COVID really impact the work of Journey House, the youth that receive services from Journey House, and really the way this moment is really kind of catalyzing some of the struggles that many youth have already going through?
Sure. Well, first, thank you guys for being so vulnerable and telling us your story and your journey. That's amazing. It gets me all emotional, and you guys know me, so that's where I am right now in my head. It's awesome to hear what's been accomplished at Journey House, and obviously to know that we're gonna be here and see all of your successes throughout. Really, as long as you let us be a part of your life, that's awesome. Thank you guys. So yeah, going back to how COVID is really affecting those older youth who we're really primarily working with. You know, it's been really tough to be able to support remotely because typically it would be me inviting somebody to come over so, you know, that we could give them a hug and then we could see each other face to face and we could really talk about what emotions they're going through based on their circumstances. But now it's really shifted into us, well, initially being able to provide the technology for all of our youths to still be connected, whether it's with school, with friends, with family, with their network. So helping them access the resources for them to be connected, whether it was laptops or Wi-Fi, access to Wi-Fi, cell phones, whatever we could get for them or help them get, is exactly what we did initially. And then, of course, making that continuous and constant connection with them directly. So reaching out, emails, texts, and phone calls, and not inviting them over, but still being there to pick up the phone, still being there to respond to an email, and providing as many resources that they were eligible for. So luckily, as we've all seen, there was a lot of government support. Even though a lot of our youth lost their jobs or reduced their hours at work, there has been a lot of government support. But accessing that support, and we keep hearing stories on the news, it's impossible sometimes. You cannot get anybody on the phone at some of those offices. So much less actually receive the support. So what we've been able to do is help a lot of our youth access those resources. Excuse me. We've been spending a lot of time on the phone with them so that they can then make those calls and really have the patience to make those calls. And it's hour-long phone calls being on hold or waiting days at a time for a response in an email. And of course, it's always about, well, everybody's working remotely, offices are closed, but that's not an excuse when you're about to lose your housing.
Yeah.
That's not an excuse when you don't have anything on the table to eat. So we've been really connecting all of our youth and providing that immediate need, however it is that we can, whether it is access to those benefits that are available or providing them ourselves. I did find myself driving to a few of our youth and practicing social distancing with all kinds of protective gear, being able to provide whatever we can in face to face. And little by little, we started allowing people to come visit. And right at the door, at the entrance of Journey House, we have face masks and we have hand sanitizer, because that need for connection seems to be an extremely critical part of getting through this pandemic for a lot of our youth who are already feeling disconnected, feeling lonely, feeling like they don't belong. Well, us at Journey House, it's exactly what we've been trying to mediate, is for them to still feel connected, for them to still feel like there is a community, like there is support. And of course, we have a mighty team of 4 at Journey House. So we've all been working and being available to all of our youth during this entire pandemic. And it's going to continue.
Yeah.
And it's not just now, it's going to continue even beyond any kind of pandemic that we might face. It's going to continue to be able to be here to answer the phone calls, answer the texts, listen, and provide emotional support, and sometimes more tangible support as well.
Yeah. Thank you for the work that you do, because I know that definitely in this moment has brought, both old and new challenges. But I have seen, the dedication that you put in, and it's we're all really thankful to have you. Lucero, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit in your own experience of how COVID and how you see COVID impacting both yourself and former foster youth in general.
Yeah, so George brings up this a really good point in terms of like how people really need that connection, and they need someone to help them navigate these services that are out there that they can access, but they're not easy to access. So I have a master's in social work. Like, I'm a social worker and like through my education. And I have a lot of social worker friends, and I know about services and supports. I know about programs. Like, I know a lot about these things, and often I'm the one connecting other folks to these things. But when I have to access these things, because right now during COVID, I'm juggling being a mom, a teacher to my child who's doing school virtually, and being an employee all in my home. It's really hard. Like, I've been struggling a lot. Like, it's had a really, it's had a mental toll on me. And so for me to, I have a full-time position with benefits, and I know where to go. Like, let me hit up my benefit, like my insurance provider. But even that process alone takes forever. And so I can imagine, and I remember going to the welfare office and getting, trying to get CalWorks, cash benefits and food stamps. It's horrible. It's so horrible. And I understand personally why so many people just drop off, because it's such a long and arduous process. It really is. You have to go through so many people, so much paperwork. And then now, well, it's virtual, like even more so. You're waiting on someone to call you back who never does. And then who do you follow up with? And you're researching, can I find just a number? Like, let me find a number online. And a lot of it's like, contact us, and like it's a contact form. Like there's no way for you to reach out. So it's just crazy, trying to navigate services and get the support that you need. Um, Even for me, and I have services, I have connections, and I have the benefits that are there that are supposed to be for me. And so I can't imagine someone who doesn't even know where to start, who doesn't even know about the services to begin with, or what's out there for them that they can access. It just, and the time that it takes so much time, um, and perseverance, because there's so many times where you don't get anywhere, you don't get anyone on the other end of the phone, or the other end, like you never got a response to that email. And you can't even follow up because it was a contact form. So it's so difficult, and I think that uh, that's that's what's coming up for me when George is talking about, like, they're on the phone with folks for hours, because that's really what it takes. When I was receiving CalWorks, I used to call my worker, and I used to call them and then put the phone down and know that I was not going to get a response until almost an hour. So I would just do my own thing and just have them like on speaker right next to me, because I wasn't gonna get into anyone until I waited almost an hour. And that's what they're doing. Like, they're really encouraging that perseverance, and like holding, really holding people through these processes that are just so arduous, like I said. Um, and for me, even with mental health, like if I'm having a crisis, I need to get a hold of somebody. Like, I'm to the point that I feel I need to reach out and get help. Like, some folks might wait longer, when to realize that they really need some help in terms of mental health. And so for me, I feel like I with the education that I have, I feel like I can reflect and realize, oh, things aren't going too well. I should probably like get some help. But people don't really plan when they're about to have a crisis. Like, it comes up for them. It's an emotion, and they need that help right then and there. They can't wait 2 weeks. And so I feel like that's when Journey House comes in. Like, thank God I had Journey House. I thank God I have, I feel really connected to George and Jesse, because I can call them. Like, it's been 2 weeks since I've been trying to get connected to a therapist. And like, I have felt really lonely and isolated. And I'm kind of like, well, who can I call? Like, my homegirls, they're going through the same thing, and they have more than one kid. Like, I can't call and like complain to them. Like, they're really going through it too. Um, so, who do I call? I call Jesse. I call Journey House, and like, dude, I'm really going through it. Like, how's it been for you? And so, to me, that's really been like helpful. And those are the experiences that I've had with COVID. And I'm kind of living in a bubble. I'm very blessed. I have a full-time job, with benefits, and my daughter has access to Wi-Fi, and we're still struggling. So I just cannot imagine someone, like I said earlier, who doesn't know about the services, who doesn't have everything they need, who doesn't have a job, who doesn't have income, who has to go through government services. It's crazy, and it must be horrific right now for folks.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think you recognize the privilege that you have in having a job, but I think you also shed light on the challenges that even with these privileges, for you it can be isolating and things can be frustrating. And so I'm just glad that you do have Journey House to call, and keep calling, because we definitely want to stay connected. Miani, I was hoping that you could speak to a little bit about this, this current pandemic and your own experience as a student, and what the special needs of youth and students are given this current time.
Yes. So before I started school this year in, I want to say June. Oh yeah, June 15th. I started on my birthday, which is very typical of med school. They like to start stuff right when it's like something you want to do. But In anticipation for interviews, which is what you do in your last year of medical school in preparation for residency training, which is where it's essentially on the job training where you want to become a doctor. So this year, everything is virtual, but you still need to like dress up and have really strong Wi-Fi and a reliable smart device. So anyhow, I reached out to Journey House because I was like the first people that I thought about. I'm like, man, I need to get all this stuff together. And I took a leave of absence last year. And so the funding that I did have was for 4 years as far as helping me meet most of my educational expenses. And so this year I found myself not only short, but with extra expenses getting ready for interviews. So of course I reached out and they're like, we have a bunch of interview clothes and professional clothes and just come by. And as George mentioned, there was like all the PPE necessary there. And I went in there, actually this shirt I found there. So I was like, I found some really, good things that I've been wearing throughout my virtual interviews. And, that's just one of the ways they've been able to support me personally through the pandemic. But in general, just I keep in contact with other foster youth who are in medical school because I like making my point to like, there's not that many of us. And if I go out of my way, like, okay, I gotta like meet and connect with this person. So far, there's 3 total at UCLA. So I'm very proud of that. Lost my train of thought because I was so proud. But I know what I was saying. Just knowing other students, the Wi-Fi and the like connecting virtually is just like a challenge for them because it's like they're breaking up, you can't hear, and even beyond that, just having an environment that facilitates professional interactions is a huge struggle for a lot of youth because they don't have their own places for the most part. They're living with other people, yeah, and everyone it has to be, on these Zooms or virtual other platforms that they're using. And so that's a huge struggle of like dedicating time and space and resources towards like these virtual, it seems so little for some people because it's like something they've always had or have access to, but it's a really huge thing that like proves to be essential.
Absolutely. I want to kind of toss it over to you, Jesse, but I'm going to spin a little bit of it in this way. Given the current moment and, the experiences of former foster youth, but also kind of to speak to the work that Journey House is doing and essentially, right, in part to think about why it might be important to support the work of Journey House, given Luceto's experience, given Miani's experience. Damien, I'll go to you next. But, given this current moment, why is it important to support Journey House so that we can continue to support these unique needs given the pandemic?
Yeah. So, I mean, as George mentioned earlier, we're a pretty small team, and we do amazing work given our capacity directly in working directly with former foster youth and helping them navigate their day-to-day lives. And then also in terms of the advocacy work that we've been doing, we've been able to make some major structural changes to how the state supports foster youth. And we're really proud of that. But we also recognize that we could be doing more, right? We could be servicing more students. We could be, advancing more policy reform. And we could have a strong presence out in the community. And if we were to, you had the ability to increase our capacity. And as the pandemic unfolds, a lot of the protections that were put into place to prevent people from losing their housing, the rent moratoriums that are being lifted in January, all of these things that are going to be taken into effect and impacting people. We're looking ahead at how that's going to impact foster youth and preparing for that, because the reality is that for people who have not been able to pay their rent for the last few months and they haven't had work, how are they going to pay?
Mhm.
And so I think for those reasons, it's very important that organizations like Journey House have the capacity to be able to meet those needs early on, so that we're able to provide those supports before foster youth end up on the street. um, and even to speak to the advocacy work, we have some pretty ambitious goals in terms of the reforms and the visions that we see need to happen, right? We last year, thanks to Lucero, who brought us in as her work in philanthropy and her partnerships that she has forged with her own networks, brought us into this Bold Vision Coalition, which is a coalition of over 30 organizations that met over the last year to develop a set of priorities. One of which became one of the top 5 priorities for the coalition was to raise the age to 26, and raising the age to 26 for supported services for foster youth in the areas of employment, areas of housing, and mental health, education. And those goals, to say we're going to bring all education supports to 26 in and of itself is a major lift.
Mhm.
It's a major lift that requires changes both at the county, the state, and at the federal level. And we're really grateful for this partnership. We're grateful for the coalition support on this issue. But the coordinating, the communications, the organizing, the writing, all of that is energy and time, that we can do this work. That there's no question about that. But the reality is that it'll take us that much more longer.
Mhm.
And in order for us to continue to push the needle forward, um, we do need that increased support. It's just a reality. um, and um, and I think with the folks who are listening, obviously for us, we're happy to take a check. I'm sure if Tim is still there, he'll be happy to hear that. But there are many ways to support the organization. We have a donation program where we take household goods to be able to furnish and provide the support for the foster youth as they move into their new apartments, as they move into the dorms. um, you can volunteer at the organization, and if you have friends or networks who are willing to hear the stories of former foster youth who would like to host a panel like this one, and you'd like to open up your contacts and work with us to facilitate these discussions, there's something to be said about the power of just having a simple conversation. That those things also can go a very long way. And in terms of ways that you can support the organization, we have a book fund as well, where we raise funding specifically to be able to pay for students' textbooks. And so that's another way that folks can support. We have an Amazon Smile account. I know that right now under the pandemic, we're all doing online shopping. And so one easy way to do it, almost seamless way to do it, is just go to Amazon Smile and register Journey House as your charity organization. And Amazon will take care of handling all the proceeds and making sure that Journey House does receive those proceeds. Um, so there's a range of ways that you can support, and we're here. I mean, if you'd like to just have a conversation about supporting the organization, but you don't know exactly what your capacity is, but you have an interest, I mean, you can send us a message on the chat, or you can message us on the website, or give us a call, and we're happy to sit and have a conversation with you about the ways in which you can support the work.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I want to definitely share um, uh, with George and some of our board members, and a special shout out to our board members who have revised our website. So definitely make sure you check out our website. Um, shout out to Ellen, who's put in so much work on the website. That is journeyhouse.org. And there you can, learn more about Jesse and George and the work that they do, see the history, the vision that Tim has shared, and also really kind of look into opportunities to contribute or to support if you are interested. Yes, journeyhouse.org. And so we have about 15 minutes left. And so one of the things I want to do is definitely open it up for any questions that the panelists, or I'm sorry, that the audience may have. You can put that into the chat. And as questions come in, I want to say, in a minute or less, all of you, I think you've shared your stories. Thank you so much for doing that. But, you've spoken to kind of the work that Journey House has done, and the ways in which Journey House with you has helped to build a community, and then really just shed a light on your own journeys, your own success stories, sometimes the challenges. But I think every single one of you, I mean, just looking at our panelists, what amazing group of folks that we have. And I think for me, it's such a privilege to be connected to all of that and all of your accomplishments. So in a minute or less, if as questions come in, and I guess if we don't have questions, we're on till 8. So, we can go till 8. Why you think it's important to support an organization like Journey House, and, even whether it's in general or especially given this current moment, why you think this work is so important. Dee, I'll go ahead and start with you.
I was reading the question that Shania, I believe,
Oh, okay.
just typed in. And in what ways do you think foster parents can help better support their foster children as they get ready to age out of the system? You know, that's one of the things that I wish I had paid more attention to as I was aging out. The different programs that Jesse and George alluded to that were available. When I was aging out, all I remember was Whoopi Goldberg spoke at a dinner where I got a free suit, and that was it. And I was out the system. So, being um, preparing and creating an open dialogue, and figuring out what their needs are, whether they be psychological, emotional, social. A lot of it will be financial, especially if they're 18. Everything is about getting money to get something, whether it be housing or whatever not. But even filling out an application for light and power, for a phone, all of those things, building your credit, having the conversations that you would have with any child that you have, um, that's what's been going on during this whole pandemic, is just time for me to connect with my children and set them up and have different conversations about what's going on in the world, why it's important for them to value themselves and to appreciate their self-worth, and to always build towards something better. And I think if those conversations are being had with children more, whether it be your own or foster children, we gonna have a better turn at this in the future.
Absolutely. And there's a question which I guess I'm gonna shed some more light on you quickly. There's a question that says, has anyone ever done a documentary film about Journey House?
That would be me.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was working at a school, and a substitute teacher said, how are you so good with the kids? And I explained that, I grew up in foster care. I'm a kid myself. That's just how I look at it. I'm one of them. So I treat them how I want to be treated. And she said, you need to write a book. And at the time I was 30, and I said, you're out your mind. That's crazy. I'm not writing a book about my life at 30. I got so much more to do. She said, write a movie. And I had no idea how to write a movie. I didn't know nothing about movies, nothing other than to pay $8.75 at the AMC and go watch a flick, on Journey House every weekend as a staff member. So, I one of my buddies gave me a cracked version of Final Draft, because that program is $300. And he gave it to me on a burnt CD, and it said I got 25 days to write a script, and the copy would be burned. So I wrote my first full feature script in 24 days, and just knocked it out. And it happened to be about my time in life at Journey House and on the streets of Los Angeles. I actually got to revise it into a short film, and I shot the short film at Journey House. So right now it's in editing, lingering hell, if you will, because we got to have funding to finish it, to pay for this and that. I don't even have the hard drives to the film right now because I have to pay the person who has them in order to get it. So, but I absolutely, number one was like, this is the first thing I'm doing is shooting a movie about Journey House at Journey House. So for Pops to give me that permission and support it 100%, I was like, this is a dream come true. I just want it out there. So to Robert, yes, there is a film, and we gonna make it happen. I
We
promise you that.
we will. Yes, absolutely. Um, I'll turn it over to Lucero. So talking about your relationship with Journey House, and just why supporting work like Journey House is so important.
Well, I think because Journey House is really unique, and I think they fill a really unique gap. And I think that they've been doing this for such a long time, and that their North Star has really been to support people whenever that they need the support. Needs-based services rather than age-based services. And I think that especially in the funding arena, when we think about philanthropy and the things that they fund, a lot of times, they're interested in building partnerships with county or with government. And I think that when you do that, you're subscribing to this framework or model that the government runs on of this timeline for young people. And, that's great to do that. But also, like, I think that there's also a need for folks who, like I have said, are disconnected, and that when they want to try to do something, and those services should be there. They should have services because they want to go back to school, no matter what age they are. They should have housing all for their whole life. Like, honestly, people need housing your whole life. And so if someone loses their housing, then they gotta go find housing. Really, people are telling them, sorry, not with us because you're not of age. Like, that's just not realistic. And like Dee said, like, it's unfair. It's for any human. So why would you put these expectations and these criteria and guidelines that rule, young people who don't have a strong family structure? Like, why would you do that to them?
Yeah, absolutely. George, I wonder if you can kind of speak more to some of Lucero's points here, and the work that you've been doing, providing services, and really kind of the work that Journey House does when you meet individually with youth, and especially in our current moment. I think Jesse said, right, this is only, I mean, we've been in it, but it's also just the beginning, right? The next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year, when a lot of the stuff kind of starts to really accumulate, is Journey House is going to be the place that is going to be the phone call away. And so talk a little bit more about that work.
Right. So yeah, that's exactly what we've been doing, and it's what we're going to continue to do. And I think it aligns with the philosophy of Journey House and the history of Journey House, where we've never been a transactional type of agency where we provide a scholarship or books and then we never see or hear from them again, or just give something out. That's not what we do. We instead, we're a relationship-based service. And it's hard to call it a service because really it's just about being supportive and being together and being helpful however we can. That's it. And not having an age limit has allowed us to do that. Prior to, for me to joining Journey House, I did work with LA County Probation, and I did work in other agencies that were restricted to certain time frames and certain time limits, and also punitive in the sense of not being able to make a mistake. because otherwise you're out of that particular agency. So shifting gears to be able to come to Journey House and be able to be non-punitive, non-age limited, and really provide whatever support we have the capacity for, that's amazing for me to be able to do that for youth in general, especially those youth who have goals to complete their education, are talented, are skilled, are intelligent, and we get to see that growth in them. Maybe they haven't had the opportunity because they haven't been able to see it. And of course, we have certain systems that, you know, what kind of services or benefits can they provide a former foster youth? And they will give you a long list of what they can offer. But then it all ends at certain ages. So I get the calls from youth who are either about to age out or have already aged out and tried to make it on their own, or youth who have never been connected to a system. But then they find Journey House and we're able to provide that support just as people, not because it's time limited, not because it's age limited, not because it's punitive, but instead all the opposite. It is exactly what we want to do with our own families. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So I invite Shania to call me and we could have that conversation and an extended conversation because I do get those calls from foster parents and potential foster parents of what they can do to support their current foster youth beyond 18. Well, I always think they're not your current foster youth. They are your kids for life. That's what you could do to support them. Treat them the way you would treat your children.
Yep.
Teach them the values that you teach in your home. That's what we do at Journey House. Unfortunately, we're not working with the under 18-year-olds anymore, but we are still getting to come in at a time and a place when the youth are requesting for our help, and we are able to provide it. Whether it's 21, 23, 25, 45, we're still gonna be here. And we're gonna continue to do that. A lot of the youth on today's panel, I met them. I mean, Jesse, I've known you for 15 years, maybe. D, 15 years. Lucero, over 5 years. Miani, over 5 years. And it's not going to end. And I'm sure they could tell you about their experiences with maybe other supportive services that came in, provided some kind of transactional service or support, and then walked away. And Miani mentioned that earlier. So we want this to be everlasting. This is what we're going to do. Tim has taught us that as the founder and executive director. And we've over time learned that this is what it's going to take to support youth. We are going to be here for them when they're youth and when they're not so youth anymore, but we're still going to be here. Regardless of what needs they may have, we're going to be here to support them. So we've had the pleasure of helping some of our youth purchase their first home, their first cars, move, physically move, because that's what family does. And luckily we have that big truck where we could fill it up and physically move somebody. But that's what we do. We get to do this at Journey House. And obviously we need the support of a community, a caring community, a network of people who have the expertise where we don't know how to do it. We call on them to help us. And I think it's that relational connection that we build at Journey House that really lets us stand out. I do want to point out that Destiny, she wrote a question on the chat, and it's been the same thing with Destiny. She steps in and she steps out whenever she wants for as long as she wants, and she knows we're going to be here. Whether it's Jesse, whether it's me, whether it's Tim, or anybody else at Journey House that she's made a connection with, she gets to always come back. And we get to see her about once a year, except for this year, because we don't have a Christmas party, but we get to see her. And it's a privilege for me to be a part of their life, their growth, and to see everything that they are succeeding in. It makes me really proud to know each one of our youth. I want to thank Miani because she invited me to my first white coat ceremony at UCLA. And believe me, I was in tears because Miani got to stand on stage and I got to be in the crowd cheering her on. So it's really cool to be able to get to Journey House every day and just be here for each one of the youth who we get to work with. They're never going to be a number. They're always going to be a name, and hopefully we're always going to be a face to them.
Absolutely.
Grateful for that, man.
I don't think what more is there to say. I'd want to point out, and thank you so much for saying all of that, George. I just want to point out that as you were speaking, everybody's face in different parts of of what you were saying lit up and smiled, and I could see the joy or the reference in in our panelists' faces as you were speaking. So that was a beautiful moment. So thank you for sharing with that, George. And what a better way to end this. This idea, this panel event idea, kind of came as in a discussion in a meeting with staff, and we really are hoping that this is one of many. I think, as we can see, there's so much here to talk about, not just the work, but also the experiences, the beautiful accomplishments, the stories, the journeys, and also the needs, right? Understanding kind of all of these processes, and really realizing that there's so many beautiful stories here. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you, our attendees, for attending the event. And I hope that we can, do this again. And one day, I know we'll do this again in person. So thank you all. I hope that you all have a wonderful night. It's about that time. It's 8 o'clock. And we will see you soon. Don't forget to check us out on our website, journeyhouse.org.
Journeyhouse Youth.
Journeyhouseyouth.org. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Be safe, be well.